Hello guys, I'm Chris Kowalcek, and for my author discussion, I'm doing it on W.E.B Du Bois. W.E.B Du Bois was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts on February 23rd, 1868, when he eventually died in 1963, living to a very old age of 95. His full name is actually William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. He was the first person in his entire extended family to go to high school, which is pretty amazing for that time period. Once he went to college, he attended the all-black University of Fisk University, and that is where he first experienced Jim Crow laws. And this really kind of started to shape his career because he never really experienced anything quite like that until he got to the university. When he was there, he then transferred to the University of Harvard. At the University of Harvard, he was the first African American to receive his PhD from this university. While he was there, he decided to study abroad at the University of Berlin. And this really kind of changed his cultural perspective because he was able to see how blacks and how people, non-whites, were treated somewhere other than in the United States. While he was getting his PhD at the University of Harvard, he was also teaching at the same time at Wilberforce University. So W.E.B. Du Bois's writing career really began while he was in college, and that's where he kind of found his love for writing. He wrote pieces for his magazines and for other editorials and edited them as well while he was in school. But his first really big official essay novel type of deal was The Philadelphia Negro, a social study, back in 1899. And this was about kind of black life and how they're affected by their settings and the different things around them. But his biggest piece is thought to be The Souls of the Black Folk, which we learn about in class. And The Souls of the Black Folk is kind of just talking about this thing called the color line, and he calls it the veil. And so while he explains the veil, he's saying that there's two sides of it. There's the white side and the white people who are privileged, and they exploit the other side of the line or the veil, which is the black people. And he's saying the veil kind of like blocks black people's minds, and black people have a great spirit and great culture and great personalities and can have all these opportunities, but it is just crushed by the veil because the white people are blocking them, and they're kind of containing them in this one sphere so that they can take advantage of the black people. It kind of references back to slavery and talks about how even though they're not slaves anymore, they're still not considered equal to whites, and the whites are able to use their kind of cultural advantages to exploit the black people for their own privilege or for their own benefit, and it really kind of just suppresses the black people's ability to express themselves and become culturally inclusive with the white people and how they're not equal in the United States. After this, he also wrote many essays on topics about lives of African Americans. He was one of the most prolific African American writers of all time. He talks about segregation and education and just kind of on the lines of creating different ways to create equal rights and how whites are suppressing African Americans. He also created the first African American magazine. So this magazine is called the Moon Illustrated Weekly and was directed towards an African American audience. And he also worked on the Crisis, which is part of the AACP. So not only was W.E.B. Du Bois an outstanding author and writer, but he was a part of organizations that also were a part of his movement. And one of the big organizations that he was a part of was the Niagara Movement. And this organization was something that stood for equality of African Americans and blacks throughout the United States of America. And they wanted to have educational, social, and economic equality. And he kind of joined this movement after he left Booker T. Washington's organization because he had a lot of disagreements with him, and he did not agree with Booker T. Washington's opinion or goal of getting only educational opportunities. We learn a little bit about this class and we talk about it, and it's interesting that he left and joined an entire different thing because he wanted to have equality on every scale for everything, because he felt that just having the educational equality wasn't enough. He wanted to have all aspects of society to be equal. He wanted to end segregation, and this was the biggest thing about the Niagara movement. And after he left the Niagara movement, he joined the NAACP in 1910, which was a similar organization whose goals was to end segregation and promote black people and their education and their culture and economics, and just have, like I said, total equality. While he was a part of the NAACP, he was an editor for The Crisis, which was a magazine created for audiences and kind of taught them about blacks' culture and education, and kind of just another tool of getting their ideas and opinions out there for society to see. And so current events and themes that you see W.E. Du Bois in, or that his influence has affected, was one of the key things that we still see in our society is The Souls of Black Folk, which was the book that he created. I mean, obviously we're still talking about it now because we talked about it in class, and it's pretty much taught around universally to all African American study courses at universities, because it is such a idea about this veil and how blacks are still, they can still be seen now today, where blacks might be kind of suppressed from being able to experience all things, and like white privilege and things like that. And these different pieces and all these different writings that I created also were one of the big things that helped segregation. Even though he died the day before Martin Luther King said his "I Had a Dream" speech, and there was still lots of struggle with segregation during this time period, or in the 1960s. After he died, his writings and his pieces were still able to educate American citizens and society on how black people need to be treated equally for us to all be successful. And it is unfair, and it is just ludicrous to have one group of people, if not all groups of people, or all groups of people, not being equal. And then another big thing was the NAACP, which is still around today and still advocates for black rights and African Americans having equal opportunities in our society today. And yeah, so he was just a great person, one of the smartest people of his generation, an outstanding writer, and he was a part of so many different organizations that still affect us as Americans today. And you can see his sphere of influence pretty much wherever you go. You might not be hearing his name everywhere, or might not be experiencing him, but you are experiencing his ideas and his thoughts about creating equality and making sure that, like in The Souls of Black Folk says, that there is not this color line, that everyone is treated the same and everyone has the same opportunities as one another. And so some of my sources for this, I just use biography.com, ushistory.org, and this thing called Math Buffalo, which talked more about the Souls of Black Folk. And I pulled a lot of information from what we learned about in class and things like that, and already background information that I knew about him. So, yeah, thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.